All right, let's jump right into this explainer on Markus Zusak's absolute masterpiece, The Book Thief. Today, we're unpacking a deeply moving narrative set right in the middle of the horrifying backdrop of 1939 Nazi Germany. We're going to see exactly how a terrified, grieving young girl somehow manages to find a bizarre yet completely beautiful form of salvation through stolen words.
You know, what's really wild right off the bat is how instantly hooked we get by our totally unique, somewhat cynical, yet surprisingly compassionate narrator. Because it isn't Liesel the young girl, it's actually Death himself. But this isn't your typical malicious Grim Reaper carrying a scythe. Actually, it's more like an overworked, weary guy who handles his grim day job with a touch of dark humor and a desperate need for a distraction.
Which brings us to part 1, Death and the Colors. To truly get the perspective of this story, we first have to understand how our narrator copes with his incredibly heavy job. He basically distracts himself from the human tragedy by focusing on the ever-changing colors of the sky at the exact moment he arrives to collect a soul. And this brilliantly organizes his memories of our protagonist, the book thief, mapping these massive cosmic colors to deeply personal human tragedies. We get the blinding white of snow, the signature black of a crashed plane's smoke, and the devastating, soup-boiling red of a bombed city. Each color frames a moment where Liesel Meminger's life collides with profound loss. Moving on to part 2, the first stolen book. Let's rewind to 1939 and see how this whole journey kicks off during a devastating train ride to Munich. Liesel is on this train with her mother and younger brother, Werner, heading toward foster care. Out of nowhere, Werner dies. Just 2 days later, he's buried in the freezing snow. In the aftermath of this nightmare, a young apprentice gravedigger accidentally drops a black book. Without even thinking, Liesel scoops it up and hides it. Now, the crucial thing to remember here is that this stolen, morbid manual isn't about an eagerness to read. She doesn't even know the alphabet yet. Instead, this book is a desperate, physical anchor to the mother and brother she has just lost forever. Up next, Section 3, Life on Himmel Street. Thrust into the foster care system, a completely traumatized Liesel arrives in the town of Malching, just outside Munich, to meet her new family, the Hubermans. And you just have to appreciate the dark irony of this setup. Liesel's new home is located on Himmel Street, and Himmel literally translates to heaven. But the reality, it's a street filled with murky snow, gray air, and nervous-looking buildings. It is literally the total opposite of heaven, serving as a super bleak backdrop for this new life she has to navigate. Her new home introduces her to a beautifully contrasting, dualistic world. On one side, you have Hans Huberman, her new papa. He's this gentle, quiet painter with silver eyes who plays the accordion and sits with Liesel through her horrific night terrors. But on the other side, there's Rosa Huberman, her new mama. She's got a face like creased cardboard, rules the house with an iron fist, cooks terrible food, and communicates almost entirely through a barrage of aggressive insults. And speaking of those insults, we definitely need to define her absolute favorites, Saumensch and Saukerl. Rosa uses these endlessly to castigate, well, pretty much everyone around her. But what's truly fascinating as you dig into the psychology of this household is that, despite these really aggressive terms and her cardboard face, Rosa's insults are actually a very strange, twisted way of expressing her hidden, fierce love for Liesel. Okay, Section 4, The Boy Next Door. Obviously, every childhood needs a partner in crime, right? Well, to survive Himmel Street, Liesel finds hers right out on the muddy road during a neighborhood soccer game. Enter Rudi Steiner. He's this audacious kid with lemon-colored hair and gangly blue eyes who literally introduces himself to Liesel by nailing her in the face with a muddy snowball. Rudi is constantly starving, fiercely loyal, and entirely unafraid of girls, famously demanding a kiss from Liesel after a muddy foot race on the local track. A kiss she very stubbornly refuses to give him. But to really get Rudi, you have to understand his defining childhood moment. 3 years prior, totally inspired by the Black American athlete Jesse Owens winning 4 gold medals at Hitler's 1936 Olympics, Rudi smeared himself from head to toe in charcoal. He snuck out to the local oval at night just to run the 100-meter dash in front of an imaginary crowd. This just vividly highlights Rudi's innocence and his pure obsession with greatness, which is so sharply juxtaposed against the horrific, racist backdrop of Nazi Germany. So Rudi gets caught at the finish line by his dad, Alex Steiner. And if we look at Alex's contradictory politics, we can start to understand the incredibly complicated, self-preserving mindset of ordinary citizens at the time.
Alex is in the Nazi party, sure, but he doesn't inherently hate anyone. Yet as a tailor, he feels this quiet relief when Jewish shops are shut down simply because it helps his own business survive. He prioritizes his family's physical safety way above any moral objections, dragging Rudy home and warning him never to emulate Black or Jewish people, just so the boy won't be taken away.
Which leads us to our final section, the power of words. This brings us right to the core theme of our explainer today. How on earth does an individual find their voice when strict conformity is the law of the land? For Liesel, it begins with her trauma. Because she suffers from these chronic nightmares about her dead brother, she frequently wakes up screaming at 2 a.m. During one of these rough nights, a bedwetting incident leads Hans Huberman to discover her hidden gravedigger's handbook. Notice how a traumatic nightmare magically transforms into an intimate midnight reading class, totally showcasing Hans's profound patience. He isn't a great reader himself, but they begin learning the alphabet together using his painter's pencils and the back of sandpaper down in the basement. I honestly absolutely love this moment because it so brilliantly illustrates their bond. When Liesel is struggling with the alphabet and gets stuck on the letter S, Hans tells her to think of her mama. Without missing a beat, Liesel remembers her mama's favorite insult, Samenge, and shouts it out. Hans just roars with laughter and draws this smiling stick figure with no eyes to celebrate the milestone. It is a moment of pure, joyful connection born entirely out of words. So we really have to ask ourselves this fundamental question. How do these scattered basement lessons, written on the backs of sandpaper, translate into real-world empowerment for Liesel? What happens when she takes this knowledge out of the basement? Well, we find our answer out in the schoolyard. Liesel is forced to stand up in front of her entire class for a reading test. Because her reading level is still lagging way behind the others, she completely panics and her vision blurs. But instead of just giving up, she defiantly recites a chapter of the Gravedigger's Handbook right from memory. Naturally, she's punished and sent to the corridor. Later, during a break, when a classmate named Ludwig Schmeichel relentlessly mocks her for being stupid, Liesel finally snaps. Building up to this climactic schoolyard fight, Liesel realizes she refuses to be powerless anymore, aggressively using her fists when her reading fails her. Standing over the boys she just beat up, Liesel completely reclaims her dignity. By declaring, "I'm not stupid," she proves to herself and everyone watching that she is capable of learning, capable of fighting back, and she absolutely refuses to be categorized as a victim. And this brings us to what the entire narrative forces us to compare, how words are utilized in this universe. On a macro level, you have words as literal weapons. Adolf Hitler using torrents of glowing sentences at rallies to brainwash a nation and ignite World War II. But then on a micro level, you have words as salvation, a gentle painter using sandpaper, a pencil, and a basement wall to save a little girl from the intense trauma of losing her brother. The exact same tool used to destroy the world is what Hans Huberman uses to rebuild Liesel's soul. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to truly sit with this duality. A book about burying the dead ironically becomes the very thing that brings a young girl back to life. I leave you to marvel at the incredible, frankly terrifying power of the words we use every single day, and I challenge you to think about how you are going to use yours.